Here is a psychological truth most people realize too late. The more desperately you try to force your life into place, the more resistance you create inside yourself. You work harder, you plan more, you meditate, journal, visualize, manifest, fix, optimize, and still nothing seems to move. You ask the same question again and again. Why is it not working? But the deeper truth is this. You are trying to force alignment from a state of inner tension. Carl Jung understood something most people never stop long enough to see. What you resist does not disappear. It grows. What you refuse to face does not leave your life. It begins to direct it from underneath. So while your mind is saying, "I want change," your deeper psyche may still be saying, "I am afraid. I am unworthy. I am not ready. I do not believe this is safe." And life always responds more honestly to that deeper signal than to the words you say on the surface. That is why so many people keep trying and keep failing. Not because they are weak, not because they are lazy, but because they are building from inner conflict. They are trying to create peace from panic, abundance from lack, love from fear, and purpose from fragmentation. The most powerful shift does not begin when you do more. It begins when you stop interfering long enough to see what has been running your life in secret. This is not about giving up. It is about surrendering what force was never meant to solve. It is about stepping out of struggle and into deeper alignment. Because when the noise quiets down, the unconscious starts speaking. When the grasping stops, the psyche begins to reorganize. And when you stop trying to control everything, you finally create the conditions for real change. Most people have been taught to chase. Chase success. Chase love. Chase healing. Chase certainty. Chase the next version of themselves. The world rewards movement, urgency, visible effort. It tells you that if you keep pushing, eventually life will open. But Jung did not teach people to chase blindly. He taught them to ask a more dangerous question. What is driving the chase? Because sometimes the thing you think you want is not the real desire. Sometimes it is a cover for an older wound. When someone becomes obsessed with love, it is not always love they are chasing. Sometimes they are chasing relief from abandonment. When someone becomes consumed by money, it is not always wealth they are after. Sometimes they are trying to outrun humiliation, helplessness, or the old feeling of being unseen. When someone cannot stop pushing toward recognition, achievement, validation, or control, the real engine is often hidden underneath. And until that deeper engine is brought into consciousness, it will keep shaping desire from the shadows. Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That line explains more than most people are willing to face. It means your desires are not always free. Your ambitions are not always clean. Your goals are not always coming from your highest self. Sometimes they are coming from pain. Sometimes they are coming from shame. Sometimes they are coming from a fractured identity that believes one more achievement, one more relationship, one more breakthrough will finally repair what was broken long ago. But life does not respond only to what you ask for. It responds to what you are. If the self beneath the goal is desperate, fragmented, and hungry for completion, then even the most beautiful goal becomes unstable. The energy behind it says, I need this to become enough. I need this to stop feeling empty. I need this to fix me. And that is why so many people burn out chasing the very things they thought would save them. The goal itself is not always the problem. The unconscious attachment behind it is. This is the first hard truth.
If you received everything you wanted right now, you might not even be able to hold it. Not because you do not deserve it, but because part of you is still trembling with an old wound. Part of you is still organized around fear. And until that fear is seen, your life will keep repeating the same hidden pattern. Striving without arrival, motion without peace, desire without stability. So the turning point begins here. Before asking life for more, ask yourself what part of you still feels empty. What part of you still believes something outside of you must finally make you whole? What part of you is still trying to earn a feeling that should not have to be earned? This is where the real work begins. Not in chasing harder, but in becoming honest about the self that is doing the chasing. Most people believe life is testing them. But what if life is not testing you at all? What if it is reflecting you? This is where Jung becomes impossible to ignore. Life does not respond to the version of you that performs on the surface. It responds to the unconscious structure beneath that performance. It responds to the identity you carry silently, to the beliefs you hold in the dark, to the emotional truth pulsing under every action, even when you try to cover it with positivity, discipline, or spiritual language. You can say, I am ready. You can write affirmations. You can repeat that you trust the process. But if your deeper system still carries fear, shame, scarcity, panic, or disbelief, that is what life mirrors back to you. This is why so many people feel confused. They say one thing and radiate another. Their words speak confidence, but their nervous system speaks alarm. Their mind says, I trust. Their body says, I am bracing. Their surface says, I believe. Their unconscious says, I am still expecting loss. And life listens to the unconscious far more than it listens to your performance. That is why no amount of outer effort can replace inner truth. You cannot lie to the unconscious. It remembers what you buried. It remembers the times you were rejected, shamed, ignored, abandoned, made to feel small, forced to become someone else in order to survive. It carries those patterns quietly until you begin to face them directly. So when you feel tightness in your chest while imagining the future, that is not always intuition. Sometimes it is a deeper conflict rising into awareness. When you feel panic around things you say you want, that panic may be revealing the exact place where your conscious desire and unconscious identity still do not match. The answer is not to bury that tension under more motivation. The answer is to slow down enough to hear it. This is where surrender begins to make sense. Not as passivity, not as defeat, but as the decision to stop piling more force on top of inner chaos. Real power begins when you stop trying to overpower your psyche and start listening to what it has been saying all along. Every fear is carrying information. Every hesitation has a structure. Every repeated obstacle may be pointing toward a hidden identification that has not yet been examined. If you are brave enough to sit still and stop performing strength for a moment,
The unconscious will show you exactly where your life is still divided against itself. And once you see that division clearly, you are no longer fighting blind. That is why stillness matters. Stillness is not emptiness. It is the place where your inner contradictions become visible. It is the place where your soul stops being drowned out by noise. It is the place where the unconscious begins to release what the ego was trying to outrun. At some point, real detachment becomes necessary. Not because nothing matters, not because desire is wrong, but because dependence poisons everything it touches. Detachment is one of the most misunderstood states in modern life. People think it means indifference. They think it means pretending not to care. They think it means shutting down emotionally. But real detachment is none of those things. Real detachment is what happens when you finally stop treating one outcome as the thing that will save you. It is the quiet understanding that says, I can want this deeply without making my entire identity depend on it. That shift changes everything. Because as long as your inner state says, I need this in order to be whole, your energy remains contracted around lack. You do not move through life with peace. You move through life with psychological dependency. And life reflects that dependency back to you again and again. You cannot fake detachment. You cannot say, I have let go, while secretly checking for signs every few minutes, refreshing for a message, chasing reassurance, or measuring your worth against whether something has arrived yet. The psyche always knows the truth. The body always knows the truth. The unconscious always knows the truth. So the real question is not whether you still want something. The real question is whether you still believe that without it, you are incomplete. That is where awakening begins. Detachment is not the death of desire. It is the end of emotional captivity. It is the moment you stop asking one person, one breakthrough, one result, one opportunity, one dream to carry the weight of your entire worth. And the paradox is that once this happens, life often begins to move again. Not because you manipulated it, but because you are no longer choking it with fear. Wholeness attracts differently than desperation. A person who no longer needs in order to exist carries a different field. Their choices become cleaner. Their attention becomes steadier. Their energy becomes more coherent. They stop begging reality to complete them and begin meeting reality from a place of inner sufficiency. That is why surrender is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is the recognition that force is not the same thing as power. Sometimes the strongest act is to stop gripping, stop proving, stop panicking, and allow life to show you what remains when control falls away. And then comes the part most people do not expect. After the striving slows down and the old pattern begins to loosen, there is often a void. No immediate sign, no instant reward, no dramatic reversal. Just quiet, just stillness, just the unsettling sense that nothing is happening. This is where many people collapse back into their old patterns, because they secretly believed that if they finally let go, life would instantly replace what they released. They expected quick reassurance, quick relief, quick proof. But transformation rarely works that way. The void is one of the most important psychological spaces you will ever enter. It feels like absence, but it is often reorganization. It feels like nothing, but it is often the place where an old self is dying and a new self is still forming. That space is hard because it offers almost no external validation, no applause, no guarantee, no immediate evidence that your surrender is producing anything at all. And without proof, the ego becomes restless. It starts whispering that nothing is changing. It urges you to go back to chasing, fixing, forcing, checking, controlling. It would rather return to familiar suffering than endure a formless transition. But Jung understood that what looks like chaos on the surface often hides a deeper order underneath. The psyche does not always transform in visible ways first. It reorganizes inwardly before reality catches up. That means the silence after surrender is not automatically failure. Sometimes it is construction. Sometimes your nervous system is learning safety. Sometimes your old attachments are loosening. Sometimes the unconscious is rewiring a pattern that could not be repaired while you were still feeding it with panic. The danger is not the void itself. The danger is misreading the void and sabotaging what is quietly being rebuilt inside you. This is why patience matters. Not fake patience, not numbing yourself, but the disciplined patience of someone who understands that not every real change arrives in a form the ego can immediately recognize. The void strips you of compensation. It removes distraction. It removes the illusion that you can control timing by intensity. And when all of that falls away, what remains becomes visible. Your dependency, your fear, your hunger for proof, your old identity, but also your deeper self, your steadiness, your capacity to remain present, your ability to trust what is still invisible. This is where transformation becomes real. Not when you feel powerful because everything is working, but when you remain grounded even before anything on the outside has confirmed you. That kind of inner stability changes everything. At the center of all this is a truth most people spend years avoiding. You cannot create a whole life while rejecting the parts of yourself you do not want to face. This is where shadow work enters. People often talk about change as if it were only about reaching upward, becoming better, becoming more disciplined, becoming more magnetic, becoming more healed. But Jung understood that real transformation is not only upward, it is downward, inward, into the repressed parts of the self that have been silently shaping your behavior all along. The shadow is not just anger, darkness, or something dramatic. The shadow is everything you pushed away because it felt unsafe, unacceptable, painful, or shameful to own. It is the fear you buried, the grief you never metabolized, the dependency you disguised as ambition, the insecurity you turned into perfectionism, the helplessness you masked with control, the longing you covered with performance. As long as these parts remain unconscious, they keep running your life from behind the curtain. That is why chasing often fails. Because what you are calling desire may actually be shadow compensation. You are not always pursuing love because you are ready to give and receive it. Sometimes you are pursuing it because a rejected part of you is starving to be chosen. You are not always pursuing success because it is your true calling. Sometimes you are pursuing it because part of you still believes worth must be earned through achievement. And if your striving is built on shadow, the results will always carry that distortion. Even when you get what you wanted, it will feel unstable. The relationship will trigger the abandonment wound. The money will not feel safe. The recognition will not satisfy. The achievement will feel strangely empty, because the unconscious pattern underneath it has not changed. This is why integration matters more than obsession. The goal is not to become perfect. The goal is to become whole. Wholeness means being able to face the wounded parts of yourself without letting them secretly control your future. It means seeing what has been driving you. It means owning what you have been trying to outrun. It means bringing compassion and consciousness to what was once hidden. This is difficult work because it removes your excuses. It asks you to stop blaming life for everything and start examining the identity from which you have been living. It asks you to admit that some of what you called purpose was compensation. Some of what you called discipline was fear. Some of what you called intuition was panic. Some of what you called manifestation was obsession. But that honesty gives your power back. Once the shadow is seen, it stops controlling you in the same way. Once the pattern is conscious, it loses its absolute grip. Once you stop rejecting the parts of yourself that feel embarrassing, broken, or unfinished, your energy becomes more unified. And a unified psyche moves through reality very differently than a fragmented one.
You stop creating from lack and begin creating from truth. That shift cannot be faked. It changes your relationships, your work, your timing, your choices, your boundaries, your standards, and the way life responds to you. Not because you said the right words, but because the self beneath your life has become more coherent. And that leads to one of the hardest truths of all. The biggest obstacle in many people's lives is not fate, not bad luck, not timing, not the universe withholding something from them. It is the self they are still refusing to accept. Jung said that one of the most difficult tasks in life is to accept oneself completely. That is terrifying, because complete self-acceptance does not mean approving of everything blindly. It means facing what is there without splitting yourself in two. It means admitting that the frightened version, the ashamed version, the needy version, the controlling version, the wounded version, the ambitious version, and the wiser version all belong to the same psyche. Most people do not want that kind of honesty. They would rather chase outcomes than face the self. They would rather fantasize about a future than sit in the silence of who they are now. They would rather try to attract something that looks better than become someone more whole. But anything you chase in order to avoid yourself becomes unstable the moment it arrives. That is the truth. If part of you still believes you are unworthy, unready, unsafe, or incomplete, then your conscious intention and your unconscious identity remain in conflict. One side says, "I want this." The other says, "I cannot hold it." And that inner contradiction becomes the very thing blocking movement. Not because life is cruel, because the psyche is honest. You do not receive life only through words. You receive it through identity, through your state of being, through what you can actually embody without collapsing back into old fear.
That is why self-acceptance changes everything.
It is not soft. It is not sentimental. It is radical. Because the moment you stop building your future on the rejection of your present self, your energy begins to unify. The war inside you begins to calm. Your choices stop being driven by invisible compensation. And what you once had to chase starts feeling less distant. Not because the world suddenly became generous, because you are no longer divided against yourself. And in the deepest sense, this is not about becoming someone else. It is about remembering who you were before fear, shame, conditioning, and fragmentation pulled you away from your own center. Most of the time, people think they are trying to create a new life. But on the deepest level, they are trying to return to something original in themselves, something truer, something quieter, something that was always there beneath the noise. You are not always building from nothing. Often you are uncovering what distortion covered over. You are removing what is false. You are releasing what was never you. You are remembering what it feels like to live without constant self-betrayal. That is why the path forward is not endless force. It is deeper honesty. So if you feel stuck, do not begin by asking how to push harder. Ask what in you still believes force is necessary. Ask what pain still drives your striving. Ask what fear still hides under your discipline. Ask what old wound still speaks through your ambition. Ask what part of you still believes that one more result will finally make you enough. Those questions will take you further than another cycle of pressure ever will. The shift begins when you stop treating your life as a problem to conquer and begin seeing it as a psyche to understand. That is where surrender becomes intelligent. That is where stillness becomes active. That is where shadow work becomes real transformation. That is where identity changes from the inside out. You are not here merely to force outcomes. You are here to become someone capable of holding what is true. And once that inner shift begins, life changes in a quieter but much more permanent way. You stop trying to control every door. You stop treating uncertainty like danger. You stop measuring your worth by speed, proof, and external response. You become steadier, clearer, less dependent, more integrated. That is where real peace begins. If this spoke to something real in you, subscribe and stay close to this kind of work, because the deepest transformations do not begin with more noise. They begin the moment you finally become quiet enough to hear what your soul has been saying all along.